Hi, friends. Wendy Twine here. Welcome to this session of the Heavenpreneur Summit. Today, our guest is Steven Musick, and his topic is going to be on life after heaven. And we are in for a real treat. And I'm telling you, if you want heaven to invade you, you're going to enjoy this session. So, Steven, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a delight to do this kind of interview. I particularly enjoy it.
Great, great. Well, before we actually get in your message, one of the things I've been doing with, all our guests is obviously we want to know your story on what led you to become a kingdom entrepreneur. So whatever that looks like to you to bring us, kind of present, then go for it.
Well, over the years, and it's now coming up on almost 43,
Wow.
that we've discovered that our life's message is that the kingdom of heaven is closer than we think. And everyone can experience it repeatedly and should. That's really the message of our lives. It's the way that we've lived for 43 years, and that we have a real passion to have people experience the kingdom of heaven in the here and now. And so largely we've been doing that one-to-one to one-to-one, person-to-person, family to family, company to company kind of a thing. Our lives took a dramatic change in 2011 with a pretty strong call from the Father to get serious about telling your story. And I didn't really know exactly what that meant, but I'm getting a better idea and a glimpse of what that means. And it's doing stuff like this. It's we wrote a book. The book was read by Hollywood screenwriters, and so we're headlong into creating and developing a feature film based on the whole idea that the kingdom of heaven is closer than we think.
Wow.
So we're kind of excited about,
Yeah.
there's a message in this that the Father wants
Yes.
broadcast. And so I'm delighted to do this with you today. And I love the question and answer. I love the dialogue.
Great, great. Well, let's really begin with your story on what took you to heaven to begin with.
Um, I was in the United States Navy in December of 1975. They herded all of us in recruit training into one of those great, big, gigantic aircraft hangars. And there were corpsmen running everywhere. And they were giving everybody injections. And what I learned later was that the United States government was very concerned about a swine flu epidemic. And so they rushed serum into production, and they needed a test bed.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. All of the sailors at Great Lakes, us in recruit training, and everybody on the A school side and the hospital side. And as long as they were at it, they also inoculated all the soldiers at Fort Sheridan, just a little south of where we were at Great Lakes. And I was one of those, and there were about 7,000 of us that had an adverse reaction to the swine flu.
Oh my.
And yeah, it was the hospital side considered that triage. It was the first time since World War II that Great Lakes Hospital was full to overflowing. They put them on a divert status. So somebody in the Pentagon made a really bad decision because it was a nightmare. Well, I was allergic to the swine flu, but when I got the injection in December, I was a very, very fit individual. In boot camp, I was one of those that qualified to go to SEALs. So I was 5'11", I was 195 pounds, and I was, as my wife would call, I was chiseled. I was a hunk, and it's really part of me that I didn't really succumb. I wasn't horrible. My reaction to the swine flu lasted about 48 hours, but then I never got well. And so I checked myself into the hospital in April.
Wow.
So I had been sick for 4 months. And the nurse in the emergency department hooked me up to an IV. I talked to the doctors. They did a bunch of tests, and she came in with a gigantic syringe. And they wouldn't do this today. They would do something in the muscle
Right.
for a reaction. They would give you a little bit in the muscle. They didn't do that in 1976. Again, this was April 5th. She injected the antidote to the swine flu directly into my IV. And I'm allergic to the antidote as well. And so that was tantamount to a lethal injection. And I had the great privilege during that period of time that when they injected me, my soul went to heaven. And I spent 5 weeks absolutely in a wonderful place. We spent almost 10% of the book that I wrote, Life After Heaven, on what heaven was like to me. And we tried to do the Disney five sensing things, what did it smell like? What did it feel like? What did it see? What did it seem like? All of
Right.
that.
Right.
But the most painful words I've ever heard in my life were the words of Jesus with his arm over my shoulder in heaven. And he said it in a very forlorn way, which was actually salvation. And he said, you can't stay. Because when I was in heaven, I figured I was dead. And I thought I was staying. And at 20, just barely 20 years old, I'm looking around going, hey, I'm liking this. This is good. I'm thinking this is a good thing. So to be thrust back into the shattered body that I got, when Jesus said you can't stay, I woke up in intensive care isolation. This was May 15th of 1976. I was 5 weeks in heaven. And there was a Navy nurse sitting at the foot of my bed, and she got up and leaned over and she said, welcome back. We thought we lost you back there. And my response was, where am I right now? And what do you mean back there? And why is there an elephant sitting on my chest?
Right.
Because the lower lobes of both of my lungs x-ray dead. The only thing that I had were the upper lobes. And so the only thing I could do was breathe in and breathe out. And, you don't think about breathing. It's an autonomic reflection. I mean, you sort of just do. You open your mouth and the air goes in.
Right.
Well, for somebody that had my particular condition, I was in a place where you actually had to think to breathe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But there was purpose in all of that. It took me a long time to figure it out, but that's the basis of my story. I was disabled. They discharged me as a disabled veteran. I got a severance check, and I now get a check every month from the United States government and the military. As a disabled veteran, everything that happens in life is sovereign. Even the bad stuff is sovereign, and so you come at life now with a totally different perspective, and that's why after all of these years, the kingdom of heaven, we know this for sure now, the kingdom of heaven is closer than we think. And everyone can experience it. We've just forgotten how. And so our lives are about bridging, bridging the experience of the here and now with the hereafter. And we do that in what we call one bubble at a time, or one bubble after another. And teaching and training people how to experience the kingdom of heaven. It's kind of what we do.
And it's exciting. It's very exciting
Yeah.
because I have to let our audience know that one of the things I had learned about you while you were in heaven was that, you were having this dialogue with Jesus, and he was giving you the insights about the pain that you had suffered early in your childhood into right there, early adulthood. And how just in that short little time, God brought understanding, and yet healing. And that was one thing I thought is like when you have that encounter with Jesus in heaven, how just in such a quick moment, that pain can be erased, it can be eradicated, and you have an understanding to see a bigger picture.
Yeah, I was. If you look back at my adolescence, they were characterized by two things. One is vacancy, in that I really had no identity. I have no idea at all who I was. And part of that was I was raised in a household where my brother was undiagnosed bipolar.
Mm.
And so he was in a place where he needed all the attention. Uh, and he would walk into a room and suck out all the oxygen, kind of a thing. And
Wow.
he was also a nationally ranked athlete. And so our living room looked like a shrine to Charles Musick. I mean, he was the national champion in the Junior Olympics in the mile run. That
Wow.
that gives you an idea of who he was.
Of yes, exactly.
And my parents did the best they could, but I basically got left in the dust there.
Right.
And at the same time, I was raised in a Christian home, but it was extraordinarily violent. My brother being manic depressive, bipolar, and we were latchkey kids. So when we got home from school, it was like terror time for me.
Mm.
And so I lived in a place where I was intimidated, I was vacant, and I lived in a violent environment. And and my time in heaven was specifically designed, I think, for Jesus to be able to put words and rationale and language to all of that. So for me, my time in heaven was really a life review, which is he went through vignette after vignette after vignette of all of the stuff that happened to me. And while I felt so much alone as a vacant personality, the Father says, you are never alone.
Right.
I
Right.
was there through it all. I was with you through it all. And therefore, um, everything is okay. I mean, I make everything okay. And that was the message, frankly, for me in heaven from Christ's own mouth and from his soul. And so I now carry that with me every day. And I always spend time thinking about, well, Lord, this thing really bad just happened. Is that okay? I mean, is that okay? Finding his sovereignty in stuff that happens is a really big part of living in the here and now.
Hmm. I would say the only thing that ever really gives me hope in times when I've had, you know, painful situations and circumstances, I can't say like yours, but, pain is still pain. Like I share with, different family and friends is that, whether it's in the ear, whether it's in the foot and of the toe, any part of the body, you're going to be, pain is going to affect you. And, and so where I'm going with that is that it was encouraging to hear your story about how the Lord just, healed those and gave you revelation with those circumstances. And for me, the main verse that helps me in that is that he works all things together for good to those
Yeah.
who love him and are called according to his purpose.
Right.
And I'm like, you may not see it the right here and moment, here now and at this moment, but it will come and work for your good.
Yeah.
And it's obviously proven to be that in your case with, with your story. So yeah, nothing's wasted in the kingdom. He makes everything work.
That's exactly right. He doesn't miss a trick and uses everything, even the bad stuff.
That's right. That's right. Well, I want to talk about in your book, you mentioned the perfect paradox of heaven. Um, for someone to experience that heaven on earth as you have, um, how did they do that in their life and business?
Um, this really comes from the paradox is that the kingdom of heaven is here and it's also not yet. And that means that it's part of a theological framework which I've embraced, which means the kingdom of heaven is sovereign over all that happens here, but the fullness of the kingdom is not here yet. Um, Everything was settled on the cross. When Jesus rose from the dead, the enemy on the other side went, uh-oh, we've really now done it. Because there's still a conflict. There's still adversarial forces that live here and now. And that our job as believers are to accelerate and essentially pull forward, pull the kingdom into the here and now. And that I've discovered over the years that you can actually influence God. You can actually move the Father. And I think you move him emotionally and relationally. And that's something that we've sort of missed. So for me, in my experience, the paradox is, well, the kingdom of heaven is here, but it's not here to the full.
Right.
And that part of our mission in life is to bring more of the kingdom here. We would like our lives to be a preview of coming attractions. We would love it to be a trailer of a feature film everybody would want to participate in.
Yes.
And at the same time, we don't control those outcomes. We don't control the timeline. I control what I do and how I relate to people and the depth at which we love. Everything else belongs to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the paradox that you talk about. It's here, but not yet.
I don't know, but this is kind of vision I'm getting as I hear you talking. It's kind of like a woman who is pregnant with a baby. That baby is very much alive.
Yep.
You see the effects of the mother being pregnant. I mean, but it's not fully here. So that's kind of the analogy I'm getting as I hear you talk, that, with the kingdom of God within us, we're pregnant with it, but it's not fully here.
Right.
So.
And that part of our job, part of our task, part of our joy actually, is that God would be fully formed in us. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we ever get to fully formed short of glory. Either glory when Jesus comes back and sets all of this in motion toward the ultimate fulfillment, or when it's our turn and the Lord taps us on the shoulder and says, okay, it's your turn to come home. And I don't know which of those is going to occur first. I don't know whether Jesus comes back before I'm dead or whether I go to heaven and I stay this time. I don't know the timing of that. But I do know that all of those are going to happen.
Right.
So I get to participate in full joy of accelerating that, pulling that, appropriating that for as many people as we can influence with this message.
Amen. Amen. And what I keep getting to with that is that, to live as Christ and to die as gain, that no matter what, we have Christ with us. And just our part is to really magnify him through us and in us. So let's talk about when you came back to heaven. You said God chose to give you a wilderness experience. What do you think the purpose in that was?
Well, when I went to heaven, I was just barely 20 years old. And I was an Orthodox Episcopalian. So I didn't really have a relationship with the risen Christ. I didn't really even know one was available. And I didn't have a grid. I really didn't have a grid for that. I was saved. I knew that I was going to go to heaven when I died. I mean, I had all the stuff. And, Orthodox Episcopalians were very deep in tradition. And I still embrace the traditions of the current church that we're in, which is really very solid in its evangelical structure and tradition. I mean, I just love that part of being in church. But there was something missing that needed to be added. And I needed some maturity. And at 20 years old, I also had significant questions. The biggest question for everybody who's had a near-death experience is, how come I wasn't able to stay? Well, if there's sovereignty at all to God, then there has to be a reason why I'm here. And we spend an inordinate amount of time and energy and money trying to figure out, well, God, why am I not in heaven? What am I supposed to be doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and at 20 years old, that's kind of perplexing. So, an aspect of my faith is that um, I listened to a Bible teaching from a guy by the name of John Wimber, and
Oh, yes, I know
I,
him.
I was part of the Vineyard Church back then, and
Okay.
came to know John Wimber and love him as a soul. But he was talking about when in one of his trips to the Middle East, he noticed farming and the way that they farm in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they farm in Israel is they throw the seed out onto the dirt and then they plow it in.
Hmm.
And John, growing up in Missouri, went, nobody in their right mind would do it that way. I mean, that's just crazy. It's backwards. And what occurred to him was, well, that's the way God works.
Yes.
God scatters the seed, which is the word, and
Mm-hmm.
then he plows it into us through siege. And I was right in the middle of, being sick and being disabled and trying to figure out life. And I thought, well, that's it. That's it. The, the difficulty, the wilderness experience, all the stuff that I had from age 20 to age 30, that's God plowing into me his seed, his word through
Right.
siege. And all of a sudden it made sense to me. It was like, well, okay, um, you know, if the Father is in it, I can deal. I, I'm capable if I know, in fact, that the Father is at work. If the Father is actually doing this, well, then I'm okay.
Right.
And somehow that makes the wilderness experience edifying to me, as nutritious for my body and soul. And
Right.
for 10 years, I literally devoured the Word of God. I devoured Scripture, and I tried to learn as much as I could about the real essence of the relationship that's offered through Christ. And it started a habit pattern that I literally, it occupies um, most of my early mornings, even today. And it's where I have a place in my house called the womb room. And the womb room is very important to me as language, because it's the place where I get nurtured on a spiritual level. And I feel very, very comfortable there. It's almost like I'm umbilically connected
Yes.
to the Spirit of God. And I'm continuing to learn. I'm amazed that regardless of how much you don't know enough.
So true.
The more you learn, the more it's kind of like being an
That's right.
astrophysicist. The more you learn, the more questions you answer, the more questions you actually get. Well, life in the spirit and life in faith is like that.
That's right.
Only you go deeper,
Right.
deeper into relationship, which is really cool.
Mm. Amen. Well, I want to talk about these bubbles of heaven that you mentioned. And you had your apparently first encounter, from my understanding, was in a
Yeah.
pancake restaurant. You were actually with a client of yours. You were on business when
Yep.
this bubble of heaven came and showed up. You want to tell us about it?
Yeah. It was one of the things that's really important is that this happened during the period of time when I was still significantly disabled. Um, I was wearing a pinstripe suit and a power tie, and trying very much to look not like a scrawny disabled veteran. But I was a financial advisor, and I was meeting with a client in a pancake place early in the morning. And when you experience a bubble of heaven, you can't really expect it. You can't really organize your life around it. It just sort of happens. And so this first time for me was a gigantic surprise. And it was actually, it was fuel for an engine in a car that was about ready to run out of gas. Um, and so I'm having a breakfast appointment, and and a big guy, a gigantic lumberjack, all the way down to the red and yellow and black checkered coat, walks into the restaurant. He shrugs the coat off of his big old shoulders, throws it into the booth, slides in, and he's got his 5 or 6 year old little boy with him.
Mm.
Blonde hair, blue eyes. I mean, frankly, when I took a look at him, I thought, that kid looked like I did. He looked just like I was when I was, 5 and 6 years old. And the little kid was so cute because he's like, oh, no, 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 don't give me a booster seat. I'm just going to sit here on my haunches. And they were sitting down for breakfast. I just thought, oh, that's so cool. He's out for breakfast with his daddy. I just loved it.
Right.
So we were eating, and then all of a sudden, that big old lumberjack reached out and he slapped his son so hard it knocked him out of the booth. And the restaurant froze. Nobody moved. Nobody knew anything. And they don't know what to do in those kind of situations. Well, I, with my abusive history and understanding exactly what it's like to get banged around, especially in public, I honestly, I couldn't stop myself. I turned to my client and I said, excuse me. And I got up and walked over to the front of the restaurant, and I picked the little boy up off of the ground. And I looked very carefully because I expected to see blood coming out of his ear.
Right.
But fortunately, that didn't happen. And I loaded him back into the booth, and I turned to his dad and I said, hey, listen, I need to have you, I need to ask you to have your son forgive you for what you just did. And he said, I'm not going to do that. And who in the world are you? And he to tell me that. He says, you're butting into my business. And I said, look, I understand here. I said, I just need to ask you for your son to forgive you for what you just did. And he said, who are you to do that? I'm not going to do that. And he said, what if I don't? He's getting a little anxious. And I turned to him, and there's an old saying that says, once a seal, always a seal.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just truth to that. So here's a scrawny, sick guy in a pinstripe suit, and I'm leaning into the big, burly, 270-pound lumberjack. And I said, if you don't ask your son to forgive you for what you just did, I'm going to do to you what you just did to him. And he said, yeah, right. And there was a whole bunch of F-bombs that went in with that.
Right.
And I turned to the lady, the cash register lady who was close, and I said, listen, I need you to call 911, call the police, and call an ambulance, and call somebody for social services for the boy. And then I turned to the lumberjack and I said, I'm absolutely dead serious. And I said, by the way, who gives you the right to treat your son like that? And I said, I know this wasn't the first time. I said, you've been beating on him forever. I said, what gives you the right to do that? And he said, well, that's the way my dad raised me. So get the F out of here. And I turned to him and I said, now this is God. And I turned to him and I'm going, how did it feel when you were 5 and 6 years old to have your dad treat you the way you treated your son? And I just let that linger at the table. And a bubble of the kingdom of heaven showed up at that moment, because that big, burly, 270-pound guy, he started to weep. Tears came to him. And the only sound that you heard in the restaurant, was this guy sniffling. And he turned to his son and he said, forgive me for what I just did to you. I am really, really sorry. And the next sound that we hear is from the 911 operator that says, this is 911, what's the nature of your emergency?
Right.
And the bubble of the kingdom of heaven was so large that it wasn't just our table. It actually reached into the lady who was at the cash register. And I turned to her and I said, tell him it was a mistake and you misdialed. Everything's going to be okay. Well, she's crying now too. That's the kingdom of heaven.
Wow.
And so we hung up there and I turned to him and I said, turn away from your pattern. You can. I said, no son wants to be raised that way. You weren't supposed to, and you don't want to precipitate that for your son.
That's right.
And I exited, went back to my waffles and bacon with my client, sat down, and my client looked at me and he said, that's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Where do you get that kind of courage? And I, I didn't have language for it back then, but being inside the bubble of heaven felt very much like being there. Only I was here. It was kind of like an echo of the original sound. And what went off in me was, this was really a big deal.
Yeah.
I was surprised at that. And so in my journal the next day and for a number of weeks, it was, Lord, what was all that about? I mean, I clearly understand interceding for the little boy. I mean, I get that. But I'm also redeeming the soul of the man who is also a little boy. Oh, I get all of that. But I'm thinking, Lord, what are you doing here? I'm not sure I really understand. And that's the beginnings. That's the beginning. That's the genesis of the kingdom of heaven is closer than you think, and everyone can experience it repeatedly and should. And that what I have come to understand is now the kingdom of heaven shows up in all kinds of different places. And for me, it was like getting a bunch of gas in my fuel tank because I would regularly run out. And it filled me in a way that nothing else does or can.
Mm-hmm.
And what was also amazing to me was other people were involved in experiencing the kingdom, and they had not had a near-death experience. They had not been where I'd been. And
Right.
and there was a sense of this was what we were supposed to have all
Yes.
along. We've
Yes.
just forgotten. As a society and a culture, we're 100 generations removed from the kind of kingdom experiences that Jesus died for.
Right.
And so part of our work is to be a bridge. And so, you know, I have a whole, literally a lifetime of stories of interceding where I needed to intercede and loving people where we needed to love them and care for people in places where care was needed.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
the way that we live. And we've called those bubbles of the kingdom of heaven. We call them bubbles because they sort of ignite and they inflate, and it's clearly a place. There are clearly circumstances to it, but they don't last because they're not supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
They ultimately pop when we go back to life in the real.
Mm-hmm.
But as we talked about a few minutes ago, that's part of accelerating and expanding the kingdom of heaven in the here and now. Little bit by little bit, one relationship to another relationship to another encounter. It's
Well,
the way
what?
life is supposed to be.
Yes, and you're talking about the way life is supposed to be, and what I'm hearing as you're explaining about this bubble that showed up in that particular story, that circumstance at the Pancake House was, the kingdom of God is righteousness, peace, and joy.
Yeah.
And what I hear you saying is the Father said, righteousness needs to prevail here in this situation between this father and son. And
Yeah.
you're the agent to bring about righteousness to show this is what it looks like to be in right standing. You don't want to keep repeating this pattern to the next generation.
Right. Yeah. I think that's what the Father had in mind. Um, and I was simply the agent, as you say. I've learned over the years now that we are really ambassadors of the kingdom of heaven. And and ambassador means that we have great responsibility and great privilege at the same time.
Amen. Let's talk about another bubble. There's another story I want you to share, and it's another client that you were working with. And apparently he was a little despondent, from losing a job, and he went to go look for another job. And I won't say what that job is, but he said that he found heaven at work. What did he mean?
Well, um, when you look at his employment history, and he was a client, so I'm doing all of his financial work. His employment history was kind of like a tumbleweed, a little of this, a little of that, and some of this and some of that. But he never really had a secure job. He never really had a career. And he was in a place where at 53 years old, he was terminated by technology. I mean, he came back from vacation and there's a computer at his workstation, and all of his possessions were in a box with a sticky note on it said, "See the general manager when you get in." The commercial market can be really brutal. And so as a part of our service to them and conversation, he was saying, gosh, at 53, I can't even get an interview. Nobody will hire me. And then he asked me sort of casually, what do you think of Walmart? And I told him about what I thought about Walmart. And he said, they're building a new Walmart store out by us. And he said, they got signs for work all over the place. And the unemployment is about to run out, and it doesn't cut it anyway. I think I might be able to get a job there. He said, I'm going to lose half of my friends when I even walk in that place, but what do you think? And I kind of shrugged and thought, well, give it a shot. Well, he sent an email, he sent a telephone message, because this was back in the 1980s. And he said, hey, I took a job. I wear one of those stupid blue vests and I stand at the front of the store. And he said, I'll like do this till something better comes along. Well, 6 months later, he calls back in and he says, I'd like to meet you at a clandestine restaurant. Let's meet there at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I scheduled the time. I'm sitting in our booth. It became our booth. And he bounds in and he's a totally different guy. He's got brand new Levi's, he got brand new cowboy boots. He's wearing one of those Western shirts, one with all the snaps, and a bolo tie and a brand new hat. And he's just the light of the world. And he literally skips into the restaurant and slides into the booth in front of me. And he talked for almost 25 minutes nonstop. And he was just overjoyed at being able to have a job where he really, really loved his job. And then he gets real quiet. And he says, I think God gave me that job. He said, I would have never thought that I would come alive in retail. I would never thought that I would actually like it. And he said, but it was like heaven at work. And when he said heaven at work, I started crying. And he doesn't exactly expect his financial advisor to start weepy talking about work, And then I told him my story. He was only the third person that I had told about my experiences of being in heaven and not being able to stay. And then for 20 years, we would sit in clandestine restaurants all over the western part of Denver, and we would exchange bubbles of the kingdom of heaven stories. Some of the stories that I wrote about in my book were his stories. Some of them were mine, but we shared. I actually had a living, breathing person. Now, he had never been to heaven. And it told me that, hey, you know what? You don't have to be you don't have to have a near-death experience. You don't have to have a lethal injection like I did in order to experience heaven. Right. And I'm CEO of a financial services company. I own the company. So in the annals of the marketplace, I'm a big shot. And he's a guy who works diligently wearing a blue vest in front of a Walmart store. And our society would say, well, he's just not, he's rank and file. He doesn't he doesn't really have a really big job, and he doesn't really have the kind of influence that you as a CEO have. And from a kingdom standpoint, those are absolutely level. There's no stratification in the kingdom. We're all level. His work as a greeter at Walmart and my work as a CEO in quote unquote uh, the C level of a company. There's no stratification at all in heaven,
Right.
and that was a bubble in the kingdom of heaven that we continued to enjoy for over 20 years until the Lord took him home. It was wonderful.
One of the things that I'm hearing and seeing as you talk about of as different roles and how society looks from a CEO to someone who's a server. In the kingdom, what I see in the spirit realm is God looks at the heart. It's the humility. God says that he exalts the humble, but he resists the proud. And a lot of times in especially in our Western culture, we really elevate certain titles and positions over others. And yet in the kingdom of God, it's really all about how great do we serve? Because the greater we serve, the greater we are elevated.
Yeah, and I would add to that um, the character in the movie Ghost, played by Patrick Swayze. Uh,
I'm familiar with that one.
they actually, at the end of that movie, they got that exactly right, because he was saying, Molly, Molly, all the love inside, you get to take that with you. And that's really the only thing that you take. Everything else that we have here doesn't matter, but all the love that we carry inside, we get to take with us. Mm-hmm. So I think that's exactly right. And therefore, it's really valuable. The most valuable thing that we can do is love other people in the way that Jesus would.
That's right.
Simple.
That's right. Yeah. And that is a process too.
It is.
Some days we do it better than others, but
yeah, loving the unlovely.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes those can be those that are very near and dear to you too. That can be the most challenging.
Yeah, really.
But we are commanded to love.
That's right. You don't get to pick your relatives.
That's right.
Great.
But it is a commandment to love no matter what you feel like. Sure. It's not a choice, it's a command.
Right.
It really is. Well, let's talk about your second encounter or second invasion in heaven. And you called it the Great Return.
Yeah.
I want you to share about that.
After being disabled for 10 years, and having significant respiratory issues and lung disease and, having to think to breathe. I at that point, 10 years later, I had 2 kids, and it was one of those places where the kids were going from crawling to walking to running, and I was just not able to physically keep up. I just did not have the tools that I needed in order to play with my kids. And I really wanted to be that kind of a dad. I wanted to be a dad that just played with his kids. And so I was in a period of time where I was getting sick. And when you have a long-term disability, you get an early warning signal that you've got an invasion, you've got a disease, you've got in my case, we treated the common cold like it was pneumonia. And I could tell on a Sunday that I was getting sick. And so I called in on Monday and didn't go into work, and I didn't go in on Tuesday. And, by Wednesday, I'm coughing in colors, and my wife is thinking, it's about hospital time. I know you hate this, but we need to get you into a hospital facility. and she's a medical professional. She's a physical therapist by training. I'm like, oh, I just do not want to go there.
Right.
I just hate that. Well, on Thursday, I got a little bit better, but I'm still coughing in colors. And I got out of bed, changed out of my pajamas, and put on some clothes. And my wife looked at me and she went, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, the Vineyard Church that we were connected to has a Thursday night service." And I said, I really want to go to church on Thursday night." And, and she was incredulous. She said, "Hot?" She said, "Church?" She said, "We ought to be going to the hospital. Forget about church." And she's scared for me.
Right.
And so we went to church, and it was one of those. They named my condition. They named my history from the stage. We would call that in charismatic circles. They had a word of knowledge about me, and the associate pastor Randy Phillips came knifing through the crowd. I mean, I didn't even make it to the stage. He came knifing through the crowd. He laid hands on me, and it was like electricity went through me.
Wow.
And I went back to heaven, same place, same Jesus. And only this time, we didn't spend a lot of time. It wasn't a life review. It was things are going to be different now. And I didn't really understand what that was. I knew it was I was there temporarily, but when Jesus said things are going to be different now, from here on out, rest of your life different, and 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 I woke up on the floor of the Denver Vineyard on a Thursday night, and they were in the process of clearing out the chairs because at that time we leased space from a shopping center, and when I woke up for the first time in 10 years, I had full respiratory capacity. I mean, I took in a full inspiration of air, and
Wow.
so I, I'm now in a place where every time I take a full lung of air, I think about what a miracle of life that is. And, because the Lord didn't need to do that. I spent a long time trying to figure out, Lord, why did you do that to me? And I'm I'm now in that place where I sort of understand why. And I think I moved the Father's heart because He really wanted me to be able to play with my kids. And and it's a pure gift. Um, when I was disabled, I would easily lose 2 months a year of time and wages and income just because I was sick,
Right.
and I couldn't work. But uh, now I have full capacity. I have full capabilities, and even now I'm 62 years old. I'm as vital now as I was when I was 35, and
Wow.
I'm just thrilled and grateful for health. Something we sort of take for granted. I never, ever do.
Right.
Um, and that's part of sovereignty, and that's part of the Lord's plan. Um, and I think I need health and vitality to be able to do what I'm doing now.
I would say so.
Yeah, that's, comes
Yes.
with the territory. I need to be able to actually do what I do and teach what I teach and be involved in all that I'm involved in.
Right.
So, amen. Thank you.
Amen. That's right. It's amazing that when you have that kind of background, in your case, being ill, and God gives you that gift of healing, that it's like you don't take it for granted. It's like whatever circumstance you have in life
Hmm.
that really was such a trial for any length of time, it changes you. I've shared it even with my own children that, our circumstances, life events, they shape us into who we become.
Yeah.
And that a lot of times we act out, and our belief systems are evolved because of what we encountered.
Yeah.
And in my case, very early in my husband and I's marriage, we had our firstborn son lived for 4 months and then passed away.
Mm.
And then it was like after that, now everything is such a gift. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
life is a gift, and you never know at any moment you can lose someone or even yourself, but it's a gift, and you look at it as such. And I see that with you, because of what you encountered with being ill. Now you look at it, it's a gift to have healing.
Yeah.
So
It's also very important for you to know that your son, um, on this side, he really didn't die. He was snatched from
yeah,
the kingdom into the hands of the king, and he resides there forever, interceding for those who are left. And
yeah,
he will, when we get to glory, he will be there with open arms for mom and dad that said, I'm in the best place ever. And I fulfilled my task while I was on earth. And the Lord snatched me and brought me home.
right.
It's important for you to know that as a mom and as a dad.
Yeah, yeah. There's times that every so often I'll say to the Lord, Lord, please just tell Joshua I love him. And he's like,
Yeah.
he knows.
He knows.
He
He
knows.
knows. He's up here yakking about you all
Yeah,
the
he
time.
knows.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. But
That's cool.
I'm really thinking about it, so I want him to know I love him. Let's go into how does one operate in their life and in their business with these bubbles of the kingdom of heaven? You mentioned there's different ways that looks. So let's talk about how we can do that. I want
You
a
know,
how to.
yeah, the answer to this question is really this is a sovereignty answer. Um, Everything that goes on is under the guise and the authority and the vision of the King of Kings. So the Father uses everything that happens here. It's an ordination and or not. It's His design. So my experiences, all of my experiences, have a divine reasoning. There's God's purpose in everything that happens, and I continually see life and try to see life through God's eyes. It gives me a different perspective on why and how stuff happens. Um, One of the quotes that I started the book with was from Mark Twain that says, "The two most important days in a man's life are the day he was born and the day he knows why."
Hmm.
And so, right now, the hate mail that I get, and I get a lot of it, which is actually, I kind of shrug off and think, well, at least we're getting out there. There's no such thing as bad publicity. But it really falls into one or two categories. One is, oh, this is another, religious nut who had a religious experience and he's cashing it in. He's
Right.
doing this for money. And the other is, oh, well, this is just another religious wacko on an ego trip. And those two trains act in cross purposes to the way that God works. Um, my life's mission is that the kingdom of heaven is closer than we think, and everyone should experience it repeatedly. And so I'm on a mission now to tell a story and to teach and to train. Well, guess what? I'm an introvert. I mean, I get my energy out of solitude. When I do public speaking and I do television and radio and I'm doing all kinds of media stuff, it takes everything in me to do that. And it would not be a vocation. It would not be what I would choose. I mean, I come alive wading around in trout streams in solitude. That's
Right.
me.
Right.
So
Right.
the hate mail that I get that says, "Oh, this is just another wacko that is on an ego trip," it's the furthest thing from me. The other thing is that Elaine and I have realized that there's sovereignty in what's going on here, and everything that we earn for our work through book sales and speaking events and all the stuff that we do all goes into kingdom activities. Elaine and I don't make a dime doing this because we're not supposed to. It's a kingdom thing. I would be really, really happy to be able to change a city for good. And so we're in a place where we give it all away because it never belonged to us to begin with. That's part of sovereignty. So when you ask the question about, tell me about life and career in the here and now. Well, part of the kingdom of heaven is that we resource kingdom of heaven activities and organizations, and it's one of our favorite things to do. We love contributing to the work that the Father is already doing in the here and now.
Awesome. Do you want to share maybe like what some of those look like now?
Well, we have a passion for development, people development in all kinds of different ways. So one of our passions is there's an organization in Wichita that redeems women who have been trafficked. So they do human trafficking, and the place is now called Hope Ranch for Women. And we consistently support the work that God's doing there through Hope Ranch for Women. And when we contribute, when we give in three ways. That's compound giving. We invest our time. So we're actively involved in the organization. We give our talent. The ministry opportunities for women that have been captivated, incarcerated in human trafficking is awesome. Sometimes, we've been involved in training the staff there on experiencing the kingdom of heaven is one of the ways that these women get redeemed quicker. And their success rate is astonishing. Well, of course, the Father cares about the women.
Yes.
And so, and then we write checks, because organizations in the here and now need resources. But we never just write a check. Our major filter is time, talent, treasure. It has to be all three, because we believe in compound giving and giving through relationships, relational thing. There's also an organization here in town called Colorado Honor Band, and it's a charitable organization that's dedicated to child development through music. And they serve an underprivileged, underserved community, and some of the majesty that happens inside those kids year to year is phenomenal. And so it doesn't have Christian all over it, but it has Christ all over it. It has kingdom all over it.
Yes.
Because it's all about development of kids.
Yes.
And so those are two places that we consistently contribute capital. But the more capital that comes in, the more opportunities we'll have for being able to be good stewards with that kind of capital. So.
That's awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And that really is a sign of a good steward, is that, Lord, okay, this money that's coming in, the talents, what would you have me do? So, which goes into really this, next to last question is, and I think you pretty much already answered it, but I want to hear specifically from you on what does establishing God's kingdom role on the business mountain look like for you?
It's everything to do. I have a master's degree in management, and I took all of that information out of academia and plugged it into my own enterprise. And then I sort of bathed that in soul, bathed that in spirit. And at the end of the day, it's about culture. It's about, what does your organization feel like, appear like, sense like in the marketplace? And we would like to have our organization have all the monikers of the kingdom of heaven in the here and now. And that has to do with how you treat people. I think it's a love quotient. So we're a growing organization, and one of my roles is to meet with every new employee and talk to them about here's the way we do things and here's why.
Right.
And we have two brand new employees that we're now socializing into how we do our work. And both of those wonderful people, while we're involved in conversation about how we work as one, are both inside bubbles of the kingdom of heaven, and they're both crying.
Oh.
And they're crying because they're going, I've looked all of my career. Both of these people are mid-career, early to mid-career, and they've never experienced an organization that cares as much about their people as we do. Well, I'm in a place that says, well, everybody should.
Right.
I mean, it's the only way you really want to run a business is
That's
to the
right.
point where brand new people go, oh my God. I mean, they have an oh my God moment.
Yes.
You guys really do care about me as a person, not just as a worker, as a mom and as a wife and and all of those things, in addition to the fact that you're a worker. Well,
Yes.
that's the way Jesus would do it, I think.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
if you relate to people that way, what happens to their performance?
Goes up.
Goes up. And when their performance goes up, our clients feel it. The ultimate success of our company is how our clients feel about us, how they feel about their connection to us. And they get that connection through our staff, through our employees, and people that choose to work with us. Now that's a kingdom of heaven culture without religion. We don't need the religion. We need the heart and soul of God in our business.
Amen.
And we're going to take that same idea. I'm an executive director for the feature film based on the book, and that I'm very excited because I'm going to bring that same kind of kingdom culture to the movie business, to the
Amen.
studios, to the people
Yes.
on the set,
Entertainment. Yes, the entertainment mountain.
to the I mean really to the
Yes.
actors and actresses and the
Yes.
the money people that are involved in the deal. And
Hmm.
I get really excited
Hmm.
about having people have oh my God moments while we're talking about this is the way we do film, this is the way we do the movie.
That's
And they're
right.
like, well, nobody does it this way. And I'm in a place that says, well, they should, because treated that way, do you think we'll make a better movie? Do you
Yeah.
think we'll have a greater impact on the silver screen of people sitting in the chairs because the people involved in the movie production, the movie making business are actually invited into a relationship with the risen Christ without religion? I just get giddy excited thinking about that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Because people will be automatically attracted to authenticity
Yeah.
when you are being real and you love like you say, the unlovable earlier,
Yeah.
and they know it. You're not. There's not the judgment. There's not the criticism, but it's just I love you for where you are, where you're, who you are, where you are at this moment. Not that you may love what they're doing, but you love them for who they are, how the
Well,
Father sees them.
and what they can become.
Yes,
So
exactly.
I'm
Yeah,
not loving the now. I actually am loving the what they're going to become. And
yes.
my job is to love them and develop them
Hmm.
into
That's
the
good. Yes,
ultimate
that's
of
right.
what the Father has in mind for
That's
them
it.
as people.
That's right.
And there's a good bit of encouragement that goes in with that says, yes, you can. You are capable. You are able, and you are enough. Um, and there's just something about that is uh, is at a very core, at a very depth, encouraging. There, in Theos, God in us.
Amen.
Um,
Yes.
that's a good way to manage. If 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 I had a choice, and I do, about how to relate to people.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, Jesus was obviously the perfect example of that. He says, um, you see me, you see the Father,
Yeah.
and I'm about the Father's business. So whatever Jesus modeled for us, it ought to be our example. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's it.
That's cool.
Well, let's share where people can find you and connect with you.
So we have an electronic presence that is stevenmusic.com. And from there, you can get to our Facebook page. Um, we're that headquarters is really everything that I do speaking. We teach every week. We provide a video blog and a written blog. All of our content is focused through there. Um, the, as I do speaking engagements, there are podcasts and there are some. Uh, I did a big presentation in Bend, Oregon last month, and so we cut that up and made little snippets and YouTube things that I don't know how they do that, but they did it. Um,
Uh-huh.
and
Exciting.
so that it's very important that you add the N to my name. Um, Steve Musick, if you do stevemusic.com, you get a dentist in Maryland. He's not very happy with us. He's going, he's going, I get all this stuff in my email. You crashed my site. What are you doing? We apologized profusely and said, okay, people, put the N in there. It'll get you to us.
Yes.
So,
And I think people also need to be aware that music also ends with a K,
yeah,
because for someone in my background, music was very big deal in our family. So we want to make sure that the music is also with a K at the very end of how you spell
yes.
music.
So, Steven, StevenMusick.com.
Yes. Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Good. All right. Well, thank you, Steve, for so much for this interview. It has been a pleasure, and
My delight.
and hopefully that it will cause our audience to want to hunger more for heaven. And for our audience, I'm going to let you know that where do we go from here? We have tomorrow's treat on talking about where do we go from here on how to establish God's kingdom rule. And we'll see you then. God bless.
Bless you.